Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I think, is our fifth Zoom presentation. And the subject tonight is, as you can see on the screen, birds of the Medway Estuary. And it's being presented by Edward Towne. Now, Edward was born in 1947 and he joined the RSPB 12 years later. So that's about 60 years of being a member. He's watched birds all over the UK and in many European countries, and also many parts of Africa, North America, India, Middle East, Australia, and New Zealand. That doesn't actually leave much else, so most of the world. His acquaintance with the Medway Estuary dates back from 1983, when he left a teaching post in Bristol to become head of the history department at King's School in Rochester in Kent. Before that, he spent a year in the south of France, mainly trolling around the Rhone Delta and the Camargue. He retired in 2011, and since then he has lectured frequently to adult groups on ornithology and historical topics. He is a volunteer for Kent Wildlife Trust and the Seven Oaks Wildlife Trust, as well as the RSPB. So over to you, please, Edward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, we'll crack on it. Well, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And thank you very much for inviting me. I think I probably invited myself. My wife had a bright idea to keep me out of mischief during these difficult times. And she said, why don't you have a look in the Birdwatchers Yearbook 2021, which has just arrived. And you'll find details there of all the RSPB groups and ornithological societies like your Newbury one, and you can get in touch with them and offer to give them a Zoom talk. I'd already got 3 of these ready. This is one. There is one on the Camargue. You've just heard that I in the late 1960s, I was living in France for a year. And I still receive a pension from the French government for the 8 months that I worked. I'm also busy readying up a presentation on the history of the RSPB, which is not quite ready. Anyway, the Medway Estuary. Here's a map. There are a few maps coming up, so we know where we're dealing with. This at the top of the map is the River Thames. This is the mouth of the Thames pretty much here. You've got Essex over here. Way off to the left, you've got the Dartford Tunnel. And here, on the southern shore of the estuary, you've got Kent. We'll look to start with. This is the Medway Estuary here. Where I live in Rochester is roughly here between Strood and Chatham. The river is about 70 miles long. It rises in Sussex, meanders its way through Tunbridge and Westmoreland, down to our neck of the woods. And then it opens up into, as you see, quite a wide estuary with a lot of islands in it. Well, we're talking about them in a minute. And then, rather curiously, it narrows down. And this is the mouth of the Medway this is the Isle of Grain here with its former power station. And this is Sheerness, which is a container port. When we've finished with the maps, we'll be looking at some of the other claims to act on the Medway. So birdwatchers and wildlife generally has to take its place alongside everyone else, including power stations and international trade. So we'll start, when we finish the maps, we'll start looking at some habitats in and around the estuary itself. We'll then look at this area here. This is the Hoo Peninsula, not strictly speaking the estuary, but it does contain a number of RSPB reserves, which I'll be talking about. And over here, we'll swing right over to the east, to the Isle of Sheppey, the Isle of Sheep. And this is the River Swale, which separates the Isle of Sheppey from the mainland of North Kent. It's not a river, strictly speaking. I suppose you'd call it a channel or a strait, possibly. Slightly confusing map here. The green bits, of course, are bits that are still visible at high tide. You've got the river coming in here, widening out into the estuary, and here is the Isle of Grain, and here is Sheerness. The sort of sandy coloured bits are just that. There's sand or mud. It's an estuary which at low tide offers excellent feeding particularly for waders and wildfowl, and at this time of year. Here and there are some green blobs, which are islands, and there's a complex of islands up here towards the right. We'll be looking at them in more detail because many of them are leased by the RSPB and are excellent breeding grounds for gulls and terns, more of which later. This is another map, I'm afraid. I promise you, I think this is the last one of the Medway. Here are the islands. This gives you a bigger impression of the range of islands. The two power stations, the Isle of Grain, which is now decommissioned, Kingsnorth, which is now decommissioned. But I think you'll get some idea of quite how difficult it is to get access to the estuary. And the best way is from the water itself, of course. This is one of the forts in the middle of the river. Chatham Dockyard was Yeats' reign in the 16th century. It was closed just as I was arriving in the Medway in 1984. And there's a famous story about the 1964 general election when this was a marginal seat which Harold Wilson had to win. He did win. But at a public meeting in Chatham, he posed himself the question aloud, why do I stress the role of the Royal Navy? And a Tory heckler at the back of the hall shouted, because you're in Chatham. So obviously, any hints that the dockyard would close down in those days, he would probably have lost the seat. But it's the Conservatives in 1984 who actually closed it down in the end. This is a fort in the 19th century, built then to defend the estuary and Chatham Dockyard, particularly from French invaders, either Napoleon I or Napoleon III. Now, some people have designs on the Medway. One such person was the Mayor of London at the time, Boris Johnson. And he came up with the bright idea of the so-called Boris Island. It was going to be an island in the Thames, artificial island just off the mouth of the Medway. And it was going to be another London airport, in addition to the 3 or 4 which we have already. The RSPB embarked on a major campaign to try to stop this happening, which was successful. It would have had a very, very detrimental impact on the whole area from the wildlife point of view, and in particular, it would have affected the RSPB very badly. Their reserves, which more later, would have been very much in the firing line. Now, you must be wondering, when can we see some birds? Well, here are some birds. These are cormorants, needless to say. Cormorants don't breed in the immediate area. They breed in Essex at Abberton Reservoir, and they breed at Dungeness, at the other end of the county, the flagship RSPB reserve. This is the River Thames here at high tide. Across the other side, you can see this is Southend-on-Sea in Essex. And these 3 masts are all that remains of the SS Montgomery, an ammunition ship which went down in 1944, towards the end of the Second World War. It went down with 1,500 tons of high explosive on board. And the official advice has always been, ever since then, don't touch it, leave it alone. Otherwise, there is a serious danger it might explode. 1,500 tons of TNT would send up an enormous wave, which would very likely engulf Southend-on-Sea, and it wouldn't do very much good to the nearer side, to the Kent side. If you're sailing anywhere around here, you will notice this. There are lights, flashing lights, gongs, bells, all manner of alarms, and cormorants. A little bit further out, these are anti-aircraft platforms built during the Second World War to try to deal with Luftwaffe planes flying in to bomb London from the east. And they would use the Thames, particularly on a clear moonlit night, as a way of navigating towards the city. So the plenty of relics of the Second World War. Now, the power stations. This is the one that's been decommissioned, and obviously there's now much more of a trend towards green, cleaner power stations. This is the other one, King's North, which I could actually see from my attic in my house. This is the River Medway here. This is one of the islands. It's one of the forts, and this is still Kent across there. This is the Hoo Peninsula here, and this is, as you see, this is a local authority leisure park. One thing I noticed when I was looking out towards the chimney of the King's North Power Station was that it had been vandalized by eco-warriors who had daringly broken into the site, shinned up, and daubed slogans here. The tower's now been, the chimney rather, has now been removed, but I do remember at Maidstone Crown Court, a jury acquitted the people who quite clearly had done this of criminal damage, and as a jury sympathised with the motives, at least the environmental motives of the perpetrators. Now, Sheerness at the top of the River Medway, just before it reaches the sea, on the right-hand side. It's not nearly such a big port as Felixstowe in Essex, which is huge, but pretty big. There used to be a passenger service, which I went on once, from here to Flushing in Holland, but that's now been withdrawn. It's now a container port, pure and simply. Well, as you saw some of the yachts moored in the river just now, it's a popular place for yachting. That's fine from the wildlife point of view, as long as yachts folk don't land on some of the islands, in which case they could cause a good deal of disturbance. So they take their place in the queue with everyone else, as do the owners of Thames barges. This, as you see, is a Rotary Club one. It's beautiful condition. And every year there is a race among barge owners on the River Swale. Slightly grey, I'm afraid. This is a castle just across the other side of the river from us in, as it were, East Kent. By the way, the River Medway traditionally divides the county of Kent into two distinct bits. You've got the Kentish men and the men of Kent, and I can never remember which is which. I think the Kentish men, Kentish people we have to say now, are on the west of the river up to the borders with the London boroughs, and the men of Kent, people of Kent, if you like, are east of the Medway, down to the Kent coast, over Folkestone, Dungeness, and so on. Well, Elizabeth I built this castle. It doesn't look like any sort of medieval castle you would know. There's a very fine early medieval castle in Rochester itself. But this is state of the art. It's got, as you can probably see, these little holes which are for cannons, the new, as it were, secret weapon. There was a wooden boom across the river at this point, and it plays its part in English history. In 1667, for example, sorry, I'm droning on like a really boring history teacher, or X1. In 1667, the Dutch fleet sailed over, broke the boom, sailed to the Chatham dockyard, and set a lot of ships on fire, and they took one with them, the Royal Charles, a ship which had brought Charles II out of exile in Holland to England and brought it back to Holland. So a little bit like the singeing of the King of Spain's beard in 1588 in Spain. Okay, just to give you an idea of the rather close geography, this is part of the southern shore of the Medway. This is one of the islands. It says RSPB Reserve. There's another RSPB Reserve, or bit of it just here. This is a peninsula that juts out into the river. We'll see an actual photograph of that. This is the leisure centre that we were looking at just now, with all the people enjoying themselves. And again, a slightly smaller peninsula to Horrid Hill to explore. So this gives you some impression of the habitat. This is, I'd say, somewhere between high tide and low tide, probably near a high tide. This is one of those peninsulas. I think it's the not Horrid Hill. It's the little bigger one to the east. You've got some woodland here, and in the foreground, you've got traditional salt marshes, good mud margin at low tide. Now, if you really want to watch birds or anything else on the Medway, the only way to really do it is from the river. This is a paddle steamer. It's one of 3 sister ships. It's based, Kingswear, of course, is in Devon, near Dartmouth. That's where it lives most of the time, and occasionally in the summer it comes up and plies on the Medway, and you can get a ferry from this side, the south side, across to Southend-on-Sea, which I've done. It gives you a very good view of the whole area. It was used at one time by the Kent Ornithological Society. You're a well-known ornithological society. The KOS is an organisation of serious bird watchers, to which, as you'd expect, to which I belong. And every January the 1st, they would hire this boat. And the one time I went, it was actually quite a mild January, which was nice. And it was an excellent way of seeing a good variety of wintering birds. More birds, I promise, coming up. Here they are. The first one I'd like to look at is the dark-bellied Brent goose. I ought to mention just before that when the birds come up on the screen, the Latin name will be given. In my Camargue talk, the French name is given just to make things extra difficult. But I think you'll recognize most of them. Now, Bernicola suggests that it's something to do with the barnacle goose. Nothing whatever to do with the barnacle goose. This is the dark-bellied Brent goose. There'll be some distribution maps coming up to show you where where to locate them, at least in the winter. Feeding here on grass, traditionally feed on zostera, which is otherwise known as eelgrass. They've been protected since the 1950s. How wildfowlers tell them apart from any other kind of wildfowl in the dark, I'm not sure. But they are very tame, and they have increased in numbers over the years. This gives you some idea of where to find them. Over a large part of the east coast, the south coast, down here, number 1, this is the Estuary. 2 and 3, these are the Hampshire and West Sussex harbours around Chichester and Portsmouth. 4, of course, is the Thames, and this is the Medway here. This is the Essex and southern Suffolk estuaries like the Deben and the Stour. This is North Norfolk. Places like Brancaster, Blakeney are very good places to find Brent geese. Number 8 is in the Wash, likewise. And this is Lincolnshire, overlooking the Humber Estuary and Spurn Point. So quite widespread in Britain. This slide gives you an idea of the journey they make to get to our part of the world. This is the Taimyr Peninsula in Siberia, the northernmost point of the Siberian Russian mainland. And as you see, they fly along the Arctic Ocean coast. They cut across to, this is Lake Ladoga, this is St. Petersburg, through, normally through Estonia, the Baltic states. This is Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Germany, the Netherlands, to Britain. So that's where they come from. There is another Brent goose, of course, which is the pale-bellied Brent goose, which winters over the western side of the UK. I'm thinking particularly of Strangford Lough in Northern Ireland, and they breed right up in Greenland and extreme northern Canada. For some reason, this is an Italian slide, but there we are. Shelduck, obviously. This is the drake with this enormous red knob on top of its beak, the female. Apart from that, they're very much alike, except the female doesn't seem to have an aluminium ring on it. Fairly widespread, fairly common, protected. Hard to know whether to classify it as a duck or a goose. It has elements of each. And every late summer, early autumn, most of the population in Britain, at any rate, disperses. Some go to Bridgewater Bay for the molt migrations, where they're reasonably safe. They can molt their wing feathers at leisure, or the majority go across to the Waddenzee, to the coasts of Netherlands and North Germany, and then they return after the completion of the molt. Widgeon obviously not protected, found in many thousands on the Thames Estuary and the surrounding area. Hundreds of thousands of widgeon winter in the UK. If you want to see really enormous numbers, go up to the Ouse Washes, the area around Welney, where there's a big Wildfowl Trust reserve and also a big RSPB reserve as well. This is a drake, of course, very attractive birds. This is the duck, the female. Easy, really, with a bit of practice, to tell them from females of any other species of duck, which otherwise look rather alike. Rather stubby grey bill, the shape of the head, slightly pointed tail, and so on. Very few pairs of widgeon breed in Britain, much further north, not in Kent. Most people's acquaintance with widgeon will be seeing them in flight. This white forewing is diagnostic. The pintail. Pintail a bit less common. In my view, really a very attractive dabbling duck. Again, doesn't breed in Kent or in the southeast of England at all, but a few pairs breed further north. The rest of them come from, as you'd expect, the Baltic, northern Scandinavia, and Russia. And we've got a female one here. The bill is much the same. Again, with a bit of practice, you can tell them from any other female duck. Shoveler, obviously, I haven't got a picture of Shoveler. The huge bill is diagnostic there. Teal, the size of the bird, it's much smaller. Gargany, likewise, but it's a bigger bill, longer bill than the widgeon, and it has no trace of yellow in it, unlike the mallard. And of course, it's got, even the female has got a pointed tail. In flight, they're particularly easy to separate. Goldeneye, not many wintering on the estuary itself, one or two, more likely possibly to see them inland on gravel pits. I'll show you some maps of those sort of things in a minute. But very attractive duck. I'm fairly certain that it's protected. I remember I think I was 13 by that time, and I was actually born in the Hull area in East Yorkshire, and I went with my mother to a butcher's shop, and I noticed that goldeneye were displayed for sale. I didn't think that this was a quarry species, and I, let's say, engaged the staff of the shop with my feeling that they were committing an offence by displaying these goldeneye for sale. They produced some very poor black and white images of ducks from which you couldn't tell one from the other. When I got home, I phoned up the RSPB as full enthusiasm of youth, and I spoke to someone called Frank Hamilton, who's recently died, I'm afraid, who was an official in the when the RSPB headquarters was in central London, and he told me, I'm afraid you're wrong. It is a quarry species, and they've every right to put it on display. So I phoned the shop up and to apologize, and I could hear a gale of laughter in the background. This is the female goldeneye, quite an attractive bird. This white patch here, of course, becomes the trailing edge of the secondary feathers in flight. Again, they don't breed around here. They breed up in Scotland increasingly, and they breed in holes in trees. And if you're there at the right time, you might see the adults encouraging the young to jump from the tree to the forest floor and possibly bounce. Another bird which is found on the estuary and on the Thames and the Medway, not in great numbers, red-breasted merganser. Again, the Latin name is very misleading. There is a bird with the name Mergus merganser, which is the goosander, which you're probably in your area probably more familiar with. This is the red-breasted merganser, and you notice the rather unkempt appearance of the bird. This very sort of spiky, spindly crest. This is the red breast, not showing particularly well. This is obviously the drake. This is the duck. Difficult to tell from the goosander, but It does have a crest. It looks as if it's had a bad night. And here is a picture of a pair of red-breasted mergansers in flight. You'll notice that the drake shows a good deal of white in flight, and typically flying very low over the water. Now, moving on from wildfowl to herons and egrets. This, of course, is a little egret. The RSPB was founded at the end of the 19th century entirely by women who wanted to protect herons, egrets, spoonbills, birds like that from the hat trade, the millinery trade. In particular, what was sought after were feathers from the crest, which is part of summer plumage, feathers on the chest, and feathers on the tail at the end of the wings. This bird, of course, has had a big comeback. 30 years ago, I think you would have been lucky to have seen one. I think the first breeding was in 1989. They were here at one time, of course. They were driven out and they've come back. I think the first comeback breeders were in Dorset, on Brownsea Island, where Baden-Powell started his scout troop. They breed in Kent now, and are fairly widespread. Probably a couple of thousand pairs are breeding, or at least spending the summer in Britain. In flight, little egret has got yellow feet, black legs, very strong dagger-like straight black bill, and you'll notice the way in which the head and the neck are retracted in flight. This is typical of herons and egrets. Herons and egrets are pretty much the same thing. So you'd find the same with grey heron, purple heron, and also great white heron. But you wouldn't find this with spoonbills, for example, or cranes that stick their necks out. So this gives you some idea of the very wide range, certainly in the old world, as it were, of the little egret. This blue blob here is the Dorset colony, a little bit bigger than it really is. But you'll see that it has spread north from its sort of strongholds around the Mediterranean and North Africa. The RSPB reserve at High Halstow, Northwood Hill, which we'll look at shortly, has at least 50 pairs of little egrets, really giving the grey herons a run for their money in terms of nesting space. This is the grey heron, the common heron. Not a brilliant picture, I'm afraid, but again, crest. They will be starting to breed now. They will be repairing their nests. They'll be at Northwood Hill, clattering their bills, displaying, and repairing the nests. And very soon they'll be breeding, unless there's another cold snap. This is the range of the grey heron, very widespread all over the, as it were, the old world. I was a voluntary service teacher in Zambia here in 1966, and I took my binoculars with me just as well because there were fantastic birds there, including many I was familiar with, like the grey heron and the great crested grebe, and a lot of summer migrants wintering down there. We're looking now at raptors. This, of course, is a marsh harrier, quite a heavily built bird. Typical sort of V-shaped formation in flight. This is the female, all brown except for a little bit of white on the forewing and white on the top of the head. They are really quite common. I doubt whether you have them in Berkshire, but you may see them from time to time. They've spread from a tiny little base in Suffolk at Minsmere in the early 70s. There's been a big influx of birds from the Netherlands, and they spread all over the south and east coast. So you'll find probably 60 pairs in Kent at the very minimum. A lot of male marsh harriers actually have several nests. You'll find them in Essex, you'll find them in Suffolk, Norfolk, particularly in the Broads and on the north coast, around the Wash, Lincolnshire, and so on, and a little bit on the west coast as well, places like Leighton Moss, the RSPB reserve in South Lancashire. So it's been a great success story. They've done very well. This is the male. Not a very good picture, but you get some idea of the variety of coloring. Black wingtips, grey on the center of the wings and on the tail, and it should be a much brighter sort of warm brown on the shoulders and on the back. It's another female. Again, very variable as to whether there's any white on the forewing at all, or what shape and size it is, and whether it's a pale cream or more of a sort of dark cream on the crown. If you're very lucky, you will in the breeding season you will observe the food pass, where the male drops a prey item, probably some small mammal, and the female catches it with a bit of luck. There are other harriers around. There are 4 harriers on the British list. There's the pallid harrier, which is much rarer, which I think I saw once as a vagrant. There's the Montagu's harrier, which is a very rare breeder, and I don't think breeds regularly in Kent. More likely to find it in somewhere like the New Forest or North Norfolk. But this is the hen harrier. This is the one we hear so much about because it is reviled by grouse shooting interests who blame it for taking young grouse. The RSPB is trying to find ways of countering this, particularly up in northern England, in the Forest of Bowland in Lancashire, for example. I have a school friend who was a land agent in the Lake District. He hates the RSPB. But the RSPB, I suppose, would say, we're just trying to sustain the law. These birds are protected by law. This is a male, of course, very attractive, much less heavily built than the marsh harrier, and a winter visitor to places like Kent, particularly to coastal marshland. If you went there at this time of year, you'd be unlucky, I think, not to see one. This is the female hen harrier, the so-called ringtail, quite a prominent white rump here, separating it with difficulty from the Montagu's harrier, which has a much less conspicuous white rump. I think I haven't got a picture of a Montagu's. We're moving on to falcons. This is the merlin, breeds in northern England, Scotland, on moorland particularly. Very attractive bird, slate grey back and tail, very striated underparts with a good deal of quite warm brown on the feathers. And this is the female, obviously much browner, but similar sort of size, a smaller falcon. I remember once being at what used to be an RSPB reserve called Elmley Marshes on the Isle of Sheppey one winter's day in a hide, and a meadow pipit flew in. And I thought, well, okay, nice view of meadow pipit, but I could see why it flew in. It was being chased by a merlin. The merlin, unfortunately, didn't fly into the hide. It went off somewhere else. Flies very fast, very low over the ground. The final falcon is the peregrine. Peregrines, of course, were scarce. In the 60s, there was particular danger of pesticide poisoning. 3 pesticides, heptachlor, aldrin, and dieldrin, were picked up in the food chain by peregrines who suffered accordingly. They were banned, and their use was obviously phased out. And over the last few years, peregrines have benefited tremendously. We've got them breeding in Canterbury on the cathedral, a typical sort of place where they would, reminds them presumably of some sort of stormy sea cliff. They nest on the Kent coast at Shakespeare Cliff, and they nest around the coast, probably about a dozen pairs. If you went to North Kent, the area around the estuary of the Medway now, you'll be very likely see them. Now, I suggest, shall we have a break now for about 5 minutes?
Sounds good to me.
Fine.
Okay.
Yep.
So you can
5
recover
minutes.
from the endless droning.
Okay.
About
back
5
in
minutes.
5 minutes then.
Okay, fine.
Just
Okay.
ask everybody to unmute if they want to have a chat.
Yes, by all means, chat.
Well, while we're having a break, perhaps I can give you a few notices, please. You must be aware that we are unlikely to go to where are we? Poole Harbour
Mhm.
at the end of the month. We're still under lockdown. We can't do that. So that's not on. But we do now have a Zoom meeting on March the 9th, which is, or is it 8th? Have I got the wrong date? I'm not sure. Anyway, I will email out to everybody. It's Jeff Clark, and he's going to give us a talk on Biscay and the Picos in Spain. And just as an addition, I'm not sure if we'll be able to go to Spain after that. It's the same week. It depends on lockdown restrictions, etc. But on March the 2nd, Kintbury Wildlife Group are having their first meeting via Zoom. We've been cut off since November, unfortunately, but Brian Clues, who some of you will know, is going to talk on dragonflies for Kintbury Wildlife Group, starting at 7:30. If anybody wants to join us, they're very welcome. Just contact me for the link.
Oh, very good. Oh, what about that?
Okay. And for the moment, I think that's it. I don't think we can do anything else. Which is a shame. Never mind.
You can always go down to the lower farm.
Well, yes, I haven't done that for months, I have to say.
Go down there. There is the possibility of herons actually building a nest there at the moment.
Oh,
Ian Weston and Nigel Clear saw them moving twigs about in a tree. It's just slightly out of sight. What I think has happened is that the the fishermen on the other lake, now Carptonic, have forced the birds from there onto Lower Farm Lake. So
Ah,
the cormorants build in nests, and I think the herons possibly will start to build there as well. So if you're down there, there's not a lot going on at the moment. The water level is very, very high. So it's mainly wildfowl ducks, but good views of everything. Whether we'll get the waders back in the spring, I don't know, because the water level is still so high. But it's worth going down to have a look at the herons.
okay. Thank you.
What's the date for Leslie for that meeting?
I don't know, 8th or 9th.
What the Kimberleys?
No, it's not then.
Hang on. Oh God, I don't know. I will go and look at my calendar. I can't get into my computer because I've got this on. Oh,
Well, you'll send out a link, Leslie, anyway, I think.
Have you got full screen on, Leslie? Turn off full
She's gone.
screen and you
No,
can.
she's gone.
Oh, because you can get more than one thing on the screen. Come on.
I don't know if anybody's seen yet, but last weekend I saw the two peregrines chasing around Sainsbury's.
No, haven't been there recently.
Yeah, so
hello? No,
I
wrong one. Sorry.
presume it's the same pair, but yeah, they're dashing about now.
No, jolly good.
What are you trying to do?
Right.
I'd like to say hello to Edward. I don't know if you remember Edward, but I took you around the Danube Delta a few years ago.
I do remember. Yes.
It's nice to see you.
That's disabled.
Well, Paul, I
Excellent.
think it was just me, wasn't it? There was.
That's right. Yeah.
I had two other friends, or former friends possibly, who
Sure.
hadn't shown up. I got to Heathrow
You're on.
last thing at night, and I simply kept down in the terminal
Cat is typing
to
in.
catch the plane, and I remember phoning John,
Typing.
his friend, up from the plane
It's like texting.
and asking the staff on the plane if they could wait. They said no, we've got to keep to the timetable. So I think I met you at the Kiev.
Yeah.
Met you at Kiev, and this is great to meet you now. Goodness me, what a nice surprise!
In my home habitat.
Yeah, oh right. You had what I was unused to, a mobile phone, and this is 2004, I think.
Yeah.
And you phoned up
Yeah,
John.
it's disabled. It's
And
disabled.
John, I think, said, "Oh, I can't be bothered." You know, you paid for the trip.
Well, mute.
God's sake. Anyway, it was a super trip. I really enjoyed it.
That's
And
right.
I'd seen the Danube previously in about 1993 from the Romanian side.
Yes.
So it was very interesting to compare. And I remember fabulous views of whiskered terns breeding, redneck grebes. Oh, you know.
And it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, you're unmuted. So
Right, Leslie.
Right. Okay. Just to clarify, I'm sorry. The March meeting with Jeff Clark is on the 11th, Thursday, the 11th of March. I did get the Kimberley one right. That is on the 2nd of March. So I will send out the link for the March meeting. But if you'd like to join the Kimberley one, then please contact me.
Okay.
Thank
I
you.
think probably we've had the 5 minutes.
Okay.
Edward, you ready to start?
Yes, we'll crack on.
Okay.
Shall
I
I
just-
mute everybody again? That will mean
Yeah.
you and
Yes,
Edward will
yes,
unmute
please,
again.
Debbie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hope you can still hear. It was an absolute delight to catch up. Right. Muted. Can you hear me, everyone? Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, we can
Oh,
hear you,
good,
Edward.
fine. Sorry. Thanks for replies. Very nice catching up with Paul Gorry up there. Nice surprise. He gave me a guided tour of the Ukraine birds, particularly in the northern part of the Danube Delta about 16 years ago in June. Lovely time to go. I was supposed to go with two friends who didn't turn up because they missed the flight, but they missed a super trip. Okay, so we now resume with waders. Avocet, obviously the sort of flagship bird of the RSPB, which started breeding during the war, or came back to Britain to breed under wartime circumstances at Minsmere and at Havergate Island in Suffolk. And since then they've spread, quite a common breeding bird around North Kent, Essex, Suffolk, North Norfolk, you'll see there are lots of them, Lincolnshire, and no doubt other places as well. A great success. This is a nice view of a flock. They, as well as breeding around here, they do actually winter, particularly in the sort of southern recesses of the Medway Estuary, Funton Creek, and so on. A sign possibly of warmer winters. In the past, they would not have wintered around here, and some of them would have gone to the estuary, where it's a little bit warmer. But this is the sort of sight that you could see really anywhere in North Kent at this time of year. The nest, a bit of an excuse for a nest. I think a long-tailed tit would turn its nose up to a bird that nested like this. And the chick, I like this picture of a chick. It's got a sort of slightly furtive look on its face. Very well developed legs, obviously, that typical sort of bluey grey color, and you can see on the beak the beginnings of an upturned bill. Oyster catchers, yes, reasonably common, and resident throughout the year. There's a big roost of oyster catchers on the Isle of Sheppey that I can point out when we get there. Winter plumaged oyster catcher. The main feature, of course, is this white collar, which is molted. The world distribution, these are areas where it's resident in much of this, but obviously in northern Russia and Scandinavia, birds would tend to move south in the winter. A high Arctic breeder, grey plover, very attractive bird in its summer kit. Not quite so attractive in its winter kit. They tend to be solitary, but if you top them all up, there are quite a lot spending the winter down here. If you've got any doubts as to whether it's a grey plover or possibly a golden plover, look for this sort of heavy black patch on the underwing, all that remains of the summer underparts plumage. And this is the range, as you see, a high Arctic breeder all the way across the Arctic, America, Alaska, Canada, right the way across Russia, and then very widely spread in the rest of the world. I have bird watched in Australia around Christmas time. I don't remember grey plovers, but certainly I remember bar-tailed godwits. Right, Whimbrel, a migrant. I very rarely send in records to KOS. The people far more active than me who are finding things. I did, I think, find a flock of 17 Whimbrel, which I thought was worth a report. In the spring, April, May, and again in the late summer and autumn, passing through. Easy to separate from the curlew. As you see, the bill is much shorter. Every bit is down curved. There's a prominent stripe on the crown and a stripe above the eye. It's smaller than a curlew, of course. It has a whistling call, which I won't try and replicate, and much faster wing beats. A very attractive bird indeed. It doesn't breed anywhere around here. You'll find them breeding right in the very north of Scotland, particularly places like Orkney, Shetland, and further north. Bit of a grainy one of the black-tailed godwit. We've got slides coming up of the two godwits, not the rare Hudsonian godwit. This is black-tailed from the Iceland population. One or two pairs occasionally breed on the Isle of Sheppey, but I don't think they've done so recently. They've certainly bred in very small numbers on the washes, the Ouse and Neen washes in East Anglia. But if you go, for example, to Orr Marshes, opposite the Isle of Sheppey, where the Kent Wildlife Trust has a very good reserve, you will always see large numbers of black-tailed godwits. Legs much longer than the bar-tailed, trailing beyond the tail, the black tail, the white rump, the white wing bars, the straight bill. Not difficult to separate. Well, Iceland is where our birds tend to come from, but they are found particularly in the Netherlands and other parts of Northern and Central Europe. This is the bar-tailed godwit, and we've got a winter plumage one, and one that is either coming into or going out of summer plumage. The summer plumage should extend all the way across the underparts to the tail, this very, very warm reddish-brown color. Legs are much shorter than the black-tailed godwit. The bill is a bit shorter and much less straight, slightly upturned. There's no white wing bar, there's no black tail, and so on. This is a rather hunched-looking individual. The legs look incredibly short on this one. Bar-tail. Bar-tail, again, this is a drawing showing what it should look like in full breeding plumage. Bar-tail breeds in the Arctic, in Siberia, across in Alaska, and winters much further south, Indonesia, Australasia, the Middle East, Africa. Many stay in Britain. Knots. Now, you probably know the origin of the name Calidris canutus. Calidris is the genus of the smaller waders like the stints, the curlew sandpiper, the dunlin, and so on. The knot. Well, this is summer plumage. Can be very much redder than this, but in winter, as you see, very grey. Legs greeny grey sort of colour, bill quite stubby and straight. A much bigger bird, obviously, than stints, dunlins, sanderling, and so on. It's named after King Canute, because King Canute famously was told by his courtiers that if he put his throne in the sand low tide, he could stop the waves from coming up at high tide. And he discovered that he couldn't. This is the dunlin, very attractive bird, mostly seen in the winter down here. The summer plumage, obviously, the very attractive black belly patch, warm brown on the back and the top of the head, and a slight kink, downward kink to the bill. contrasting with the winter plumage. So a pretty nondescript bird. You'll still be looking at the bill, slightly kinked downwards. You might confuse it with a sanderling in winter, which is much whiter, much grayer on the back, and has normally a sort of black patch on the shoulder, and runs incredibly fast. The Tringa genus is the shanks. You've got greater and lesser yellow legs, which I'm not dealing with here, nor have I got slides of green shank, which is a regular migrant, nor of spotted red shank, or dusky red shank as it used to be called. This is the common red shank. Any bird watcher will tell you that red shanks are a real pain because they're incredibly nervous. And if you're watching what you think is some unusual rare species, a red shank may very well fly up, calling in a shrill way and scare off the bird you're really looking for. In flight, of course, very different from the other shanks. A lot of white on the trailing edge of the wing and a big white rump patch extending well up the back. Now, terns. Well, it's not difficult to decipher this one. It's a sandwich tern, the most gull-like of the commoner terns here. There is a gull-billed tern, which I've seen in the Camargue, but very rare in Britain. Crest loses a good deal of the black in the autumn. Has quite a heavy black bill with a yellow tip, black legs. I'm going to try and imitate a call now. Kirik. That's a lot, I'm afraid. But a very, very sharp call. And I think we've got some, here's a map coming up, yes. So you find them breeding around Hampshire, the Isle of Wight, Sussex, Rye Harbour, which is actually just across the border from Kent in Sussex. This is the Medway area. They nest on the islands in the Medway, one or two in Essex. This is the Minsmay. Obviously, probably been to Minsmay, many of you. On the scrape between the beach and the rest of the marsh. There are substantial numbers of terns. North Norfolk at Scolt Head and Blakeney Point, quite common. And then you find them up in Scotland, right up in the north, and along the west coast as well, including, I think this is Semlin Bay and Anglesey, and here at Walney. 2 nights ago, I was talking to the Cumbria group giving the same talk. Okay. Worldwide distribution, quite well distributed. I don't think the RSPB are terribly worried about sandwich terns. I think they're much more worried about little terns. I haven't got a slide of a little tern, for example. Now, gulls, the misnamed black-headed gull, should really be called, of course, the brown-headed gull, quite an attractive bird in summer plumage. Very common breeder in the Medway on those islands that we've looked at, and in winter, still very, very common. Non-bird watchers often tend to refer to gulls as seagulls. Well, some are, but the black-headed gull is quite likely to be found inland, on farmland, and so on. Winter plumage here, a slight patch behind the eye, a little bit around the eye, the bill, not to be confused with the Mediterranean gull, which is coming up. So black-headed gull, really very common indeed. Again, the RSPB not losing any sleep over this. I don't think people gather their eggs anymore. There used to be a sort of culinary delicacy, but I think they're protected now. Right, Mediterranean gull. These have been coming into the UK over the last 20 or 30 years, particularly to be found in the southeast. I think I saw my first one in Greece, in northern Greece. Very attractive bird in summer plumage, genuine black head, and the black extending quite a long way down the nape at the back. The bill, more of a sort of crimson than a scarlet color, and rather heavy and slightly drooping. Red legs. In winter, keeps a good deal more of its black or brown head than the black-headed gull does. Bill has slightly changed color, legs not so much. And I've said here, truly a Mediterranean gull. Yes, for once, it's a bird that's well named. You'll have a job to find a Kentish plover in Kent, and you'll really have a job to find a Dartford warbler in the streets of Dartford in Kent. But a Mediterranean gull around the Mediterranean, that makes sense. Owls, this of course is the short-eared owl. In other words, you might call it the non-eared owl. Their population depends very much on the vole supply at any time of year. If there are enough voles around, a few of them will stay and breed. Otherwise, they will head north. That's give you some idea of them in flight. They've got these sort of pale patches towards the end of the wing. They're a diurnal owl. In other words, you'll see them in the daytime. You'll be lucky to see a barn owl in the daytime, which I have seen, but much more likely at dusk, or dawn for that matter. Long-eared owls, I've been shown them at Elmley. Very secretive birds, but they have genuine long ears if you can find them. Talking about boats, I haven't done this for a few years, but this boatman called Ray Wade, who has his own boat, here are his contact details. He may still be running these trips for all I know, really at any time of year. And it really is much the best way to see birds, particularly on the islands. If you're a keen drinker of alcohol, you'll find it more difficult because Ray runs a dry boat, which strikes me as entirely fair enough. Now, so far we've looked really at the Medway Estuary itself and the immediate confines, and I want to look a bit to the west, to the Hoo Peninsula, the area dividing the Medway in the west from the Thames. And this is a map. So here's the Medway, the fourth map of the Medway. And this is the River Thames here. High Halstow, the RSPB reserve with the heronry and the little egret colony is here. Cooling is where Jules Holland lives. Cliff this is Cliff Marshes, this is the village of Cliff is just here, is a relatively new RSPB reserve where black-winged stilts have at least tried to breed in recent years. So we'll be focusing on that in a moment. This is just the top left-hand corner of the Hoo Peninsula. So this is the RSPB at Northwood Hill. These purple lines are footpaths. The darker green is the woodland. You'll find that the herons actually nest pretty much along here. And the paler green is marshland or farmland, which is part of the RSPB reserve. Over to the left, you've got, this is very close to the River Thames, you've got the sort of creek here, you've got these gravel pits here, some gravel pits here that aren't actually part of the Cliff Reserve, but where I have seen quite a lot of goldeneye, and this one here, which is always worth checking. High Halstow, RSPB bidding people welcome at the car park. The woodland, of course, accommodates nightingales. Nightingales have their stronghold in Kent. Maybe a couple of thousand pairs on a good day. Every now and then there's a scare that there's going to be a development for a new housing estate or something has happened recently. That was seen off, a bit like Boris and his island, but not exactly a common bird, and of course difficult to see, but not too difficult to hear. And certainly at High Halstow, you'll find quite a large number of them. As you'll find the common whitethroat, full throat here. They were in trouble a few years back because of drought in the Sahel. Sahel is the area south of the Sahara, which is semi-desert, which all these passerines and other migrants have to cross to and fro on migration. But I think the whitethroat population is holding up much better now. Not a good picture, I'm afraid, but it's the only one. The bird that's really in trouble, and has been for some time, is the turtle dove. When I first came to Kent, as you were hearing in 1983, it was quite a widespread and common bird. You could go pretty well anywhere and find them in the spring, that unmistakable purring sound. Much less common now. They've crashed by about 95%. And the problem is to try and work out what went wrong. I'd be tempted to blame our French hunting fraternity in the Médoc area, the wine-growing area in southwest France, where traditionally there are special hides for shooting turtle doves in the spring, which is normally regarded as unacceptable, to give the birds a chance to build up their numbers. I think there have been some quite difficult negotiations with the French government and the EU over directives trying to protect, but I don't think that's the main. This has been going on for years. I don't think that's the main factor. The main factors may concern food, diet, and habitat. There is a special RSPB survey taking place later this summer, all being well, where I've offered to work as a volunteer. The Cliff Pools Reserve, this is a slightly closer glimpse of it. A whole complex of outworked gravel pits with footpaths round the edge. So if you want a long walk, this is the place. There is a car park, which is roughly here. Now, this is the starbird, say has appeared of late, black-winged stilt. It's always a slightly ridiculous looking bird, it seems to me, and I'm amazed that they managed to survive. But they have spread from the continent. There have certainly been breeding attempts at Cliff, and also in Essex, and for all I know, elsewhere. It's one thing for them actually to make a nest and to bring up some young, but will they survive? There are a lot of predators out there. There's a danger of flooding and the kind of habitat they choose. But it's a bird which is, I think, really trying very hard to move in. Now, the third, I think, final area is the Isle of Sheppey itself. At the top left-hand corner, we've got the mouth of the Medway. This is the Isle of Grain with its former power station. This is Sheerness with its container port. This is the River Swale, which separates the island from North Kent. Now, Orr Marshes is somewhere along here. There used to be a ferry across here, but no more. Now, looking at the island itself, it's fairly built up on the north side. Stanford Hill, there are 3 prisons here, including HMP Swale. A number of quite high-profile prisoners, like Winston Silcott, have been banged up there. You've got a caravan park and a sort of holiday village here. I wouldn't recommend the seafood stalls. If I were you, I became very ill from having bought some seafood one of these one day. The southern part of the Isle of Sheppey is much less populated. This is Shellness, and this obviously is the other side. This is North Kent. More about Shellness later. Little terns, I think, have disappeared from here as a breeding bird, and they also bred in the north, where there is a national nature reserve, and I did a bit of monitoring there for them, but clinging on possibly 1 or 2 pairs. The Swale is a good place for viewing mergansers, particularly around here, the wider bit. I've seen eider here. I've seen gannets here. So it's very much where the sea meets the main estuary. Now this area around here is where it says Swale Marshes, is the old RSPB Elmley Reserve. I used to go there a lot when I first came to Kent. It involved driving along a track. This is the main road here, the bridge, driving along a track to Kings Hill Farm, about here, where there was parking, and where James II, sorry about the history lesson, James II spent his last night in about 1688, before he went off to France in exile at Kings Hill Farm. Well, the RSPB no longer have the lease on this, something like 3,000 acres, I think. A couple of farming families have recovered the freehold of the land. I'm not quite sure what went wrong there. Maybe the RSPB didn't want to carry on or whatever. But it's worth going there because you can still go to Kings Hill Farm, park up. It may have to pay for parking now, and then it's quite a walk from the farm about here to the main hides are in this sort of area, and the furthest you can go is Spit End, where there's a final hide here. So it's quite a long walk. If you are a disabled badge holder, you can drive to, well, just a point about here, just short of the first hide. But some good bird watching to be had still. That's Shellness, a bit closer up. Now, I'm going to show slides of some slightly unusual birds. This is a buzzard. Buteo is a word for a buzzard. It's a rough-legged buzzard from Scandinavia. 1 or 2 come over in the winter, particularly to Sheppey. There's a special raptor viewpoint on the Isle of Sheppey, which is run by the RSPB, totally free. You simply park up and wait and see what happens. Marsh harriers, peregrine, merlin, possibly kestrel, barn owl, and on a good day, common buzzard possibly, but the rough-legged buzzard, which is, you can see it's diagnostic patches on the wing, and particularly this dark patch on the lower underside. Slightly unusual thing about rough-legged buzzards is that they hover in a way that no other large raptor that I know of does. Something that one thinks of with kestrels, for example. Osprey, very much another RSPB reserve after all those efforts in the 50s to protect the Loch Garten colony. They pass through every year. It's a good place for them. The Medway, the swale, plenty of fish. One year, a little while back, I remember I went several times to the swale, and there was an immature osprey that hung around for several weeks. It had found plenty of fish, a few passerines, corn bunting in full flow, full throat possibly. You'll find them on the southern part of the Isle of Sheppey. Has been in trouble, but I think possibly holding up. Unmistakable from its sort of jangling keys sounding song, not for its bright plumage. Well, this one has brighter plumage, possibly a little bit later or earlier in the season. This is the winchat, of course. It's got a pale patch, a pale stripe above the eye, a bit like the whimbrel, white collar. It should have, in full breeding plumage, much warmer, reddy brown underparts. They don't breed here, they pass through. And again, I think they have declined. An upland species, I've watched them in the spring on their breeding grounds, particularly in Wales and the marches of Wales. Not a brilliant picture of a snow bunting. I've seen snow buntings in two places in Kent. One is Sandwich Bay on the coast, much further east, and the other is at Shellness. A very tame bird, very distinctive, lots of white, no longer the black head that the males had in the summer, but unmistakable. Now I'm finishing up with a couple of rare, unusual birds, I'm giving a sort of nod towards twitching. I noticed that in the press in the last day or so, a number of twitchers, I forget what they were looking for, were actually arrested, fined for breaking COVID regulations. So watch out, twitchers. I went through a sort of twitching period myself, good 30 years ago, and I realized that if I didn't get a grip, it would just take over my life, as it does with a few people, not all by any means. And I remembered when I was 12, you kindly mentioned that I joined the RSPB in, I guess, 1959, when I was 12, a schoolboy, and I went through a very short period of egg collecting. And I only took one egg. I only took eggs from common species, and I blew them, but and put them in a glass case. But I realized if I didn't get a grip, that this could really take over my life. When I did join the RSPB, I got a letter, which you probably wouldn't get a letter from the secretary now, but you get an email of some sort. I got a letter from Flying Officer P.E. Brown, who was the secretary of the RSPB, welcoming me to the RSPB, but warning me against egg collecting. I remember thinking at the time, they know. I must be careful. And he mentioned that a well-known bird watcher, Desmond Netherthell Thompson, who didn't mention by name, but it was quite clear this is who it was, the writer of a very fine monograph on the greenshank, had been on the quiet stealing greenshank eggs in Scotland. had other birds' eggs, and he'd been expelled from the RSPB. So that was one of the things that shook me out of this rather childish obsession. Now, the rare birds, I've seen both of them, not because I've deliberately gone out to look for them, but because I just happened to be around when they were there. This is at Ore Marshes on the southern shore of the River Swale. This is a dowitcher. It's a long-billed dowitcher. I'm not quite sure how you can tell one apart from the other, the long bill and the short bill. No doubt short bill's got a shorter bill. American bird, a sort of cross between a snipe and a godwit, and I've seen them in Canada in summer plumage in the breeding season. But one of these turned up, and the same bird seems to come back year after year. And this was pointed out to me by somebody, so that goes on the list. This is not another Mediterranean gull. It has got, for example, an all black bill. The black on the head doesn't come down quite as fast south, as it were, as the Mediterranean gull, and it's a bit smaller and so on. This is Bonaparte's gull. Now, the French name is not Mouette Bonaparte. It's called something else. And as you see, the Latin name is Philadelphia. Another American bird. One was pointed out to me at Ore Marshes. It didn't look like this. It looked like that. And I remember thinking, big deal. But it was obviously not a black-headed gull. It doesn't have this quite prominent white forewing. It's got quite a big black patch behind the eye, and the bill is still quite short, stubby, and above all black. But that is the one I saw at Ore some years ago. Well, that I think is the last slide. So I'll just get back to, here we are. Oh. People still here?
Yes.
Oh, jolly good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks very much. Bob.
Okay, well, Edward, thank you very much. That was very informative. If anyone has got any questions, please fire away now. Okay, I'll start off then.
Okay.
It must be 10 years back at Shellness Point there that we saw snow bunting.
Yes.
On our last trip about 4 years ago, we didn't find them at all.
No.
Are they declining in that area?
I think they're declining in that area. You're quite right. At one time, you could go any time in the winter and you'd see a few. The place I have seen them is Sandwich Bay, which is somebody not unmuted? Great, thanks. Sandwich Bay, much further to the east, where there is a bird observatory, and there's a footpath across the Sandwich Golf Links. It's very sort of, I think it's called the Royal Sandwich Golf Club or something. A very prominent golf course. You take your life in your hands crossing the golf course, because you might get hit by a golf ball, even if they do shout 4. But once you cross over, you get to the beach, and I've seen a lot of a lot of snow buntings along there. So that's probably a better place now. I'm not sure where else one would go in the southeast for them. In the breeding season, of course, you can see 1 or 2 in the Cairngorms at the tops.
Yeah, yeah. The other question was on knots. Again,
Yes.
10 years ago, I saw knots of 5,000. On our last trip, it was 10s. Are they declining in the area?
I don't think they've ever been very, very common. Interesting, you've seen many, many more.
Yeah, maybe it was a lucky day.
I think it was a lucky day. The place where thousands are concentrated is the Wash. If you go to Snettisham on the eastern side of the Wash at the right time of tide, you will see thousands.
Yeah.
You'll see them really throughout the winter, into the spring when they'll be into breeding plumage, and coming back from July onwards. So it's not. On the other hand, Shellness is a very, very good place for waders, not necessarily very large numbers, but if you pick the right stage of the tide, you can get quite close to them. I'm talking about Sanderling, Knox, Turnstone, Godwits, oyster catchers, Dunlin, that sort of thing. If you start off at about an hour and a half before the high tide, or an hour and a half after the high tide, you can see them very well indeed. But as you say, much smaller numbers perhaps than elsewhere.
Right. Any other questions, anybody?
Yeah, I was interested in the fact that the RSPB don't have Elmley anymore.
Yes. I'm afraid I just don't know what the answer is to that. What I do know is that the landowners, a couple of farming families who cover that area, have taken back, are very keen on conservation, and particularly in encouraging unusual breeding birds. I don't really know what has happened. It may be that the RSPB lost interest for some reason, or that the farmers decided they'd rather take back the freehold and run the place themselves. There's a similar RSPB called Hornsey Mere in East Yorkshire, which is where I grew up.
Yes.
And the same thing has happened there. The landowner, Strickland Constable at Wassend Hall, I don't think they had a very, very good relationship with the RSPB. But certainly when the lease expired, the landowner took it over. But a bit like Elmley, it's still a very good place for birds, but there isn't an RSPB present.
Right.
So I can't think that may have happened at other places. The RSPB, it doesn't always have a freehold. What they prefer, obviously, to have outright ownership. And they have, I think, something like 200 reserves all over the country. I mean, for example, when they took over Minsmere, I can't remember the name of the family that owned the Minsmere Reserve, but they had to agree to shooting rights. And so you had the odd position where the RSPB were running it as a nature reserve, but once or twice a year, they had to allow a shoot, a wildfowl, which obviously upset some RSPB members, but which was the only way they would get the deal. But then they did take over the freehold of Minsmere, which they've kept. So I'm sorry, I can't really enlighten you any more about what's happened. It may be quite a simple explanation.
I got the impression from our quick visit there 4 years ago or whenever that you have to pay to go beyond the car park now. Probably pay for the car park, then
Yes,
pay
that's
to
right.
go beyond the car park.
That's right. It was, I think before with the RSPB, you had to be an RSPB member or you had to pay.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's right. I think that the present owners are running it on a much more commercial basis. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got one for Edward.
Okay.
Very much enjoyed all your maps. The one that I really loved was about the migration of the dark-bellied Brent goose. And I
Yes.
just wonder, is that a result of ringing, conventional ringing, or was it satellite tagged? Well, how was that actually located and that migration route actually detailed?
I don't know. It's a very, very good question. It may simply have been through observations over the years. The birds disappear at the end of the breeding season. They appear to be flying west. People observe them flying around and flying over, possibly dropping in for a little nibble at some eelgrass, and then flying on. So I'm really not quite sure. I said it may well be that there has been some ringing this end and at the Russian end that would confirm where they come from. I'm afraid I can't be absolutely definite about that.
It's just the sort of migration that will be very amenable to these geolocated tags, I suppose. And so
Yes.
probably in the fullness of time that will be done anyway.
Yes, yes. I was reading an article in the Norfolk, what it's called. I belong to the Norfolk Natural, I think that's what it's, or Norfolk Wildlife Trust, where I get my Christmas cards from. And this was about wing tagging of marsh harriers. That if you want to attach a satellite transmitter to a bird, so you can follow it around, it costs £3,000 a head, and you know, a small society like that can't afford it. But that's another way of tagging birds, because you can read the code on the tag when the bird is in flight much more easily than you can read the ring number if you're looking at it on birds on the ground. But of course, many birds of prey have been satellite tagged, and that's how we know that, you know, something's gone wrong, when they simply go off the radar, literally.
Indeed. Yep. Any more? Well, I think that's it, Edward. Well, thank
Okay,
you.
thanks.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
Yep. Thank you very much. We'll see you
Okay.
again, no doubt.
Okay. Bye then.
Bye.
Right.
Bye bye.
Bye.